The siege of Tyre was one of the most epic sieges in ancient history, but it is often forgotten today. The defenders of Tyre fought against Alexander the Great for 7 months, turning away attack after attack. They even managed to kill 2 of his elephants. It is truly an amazing feat of defense, but how did they do it? And why don't we know about it today? Well, that is what we will find out today. Alexander the Great, king of Macedon, had just defeated the Persians at the Battle of Issus. He had seized their king, Darius, and was now moving south into the Levant. He planned to take over the region and use its resources to further his conquest of the Persian Empire. He approached the Phoenician city of Sidon, but the citizens closed their gates against him. Alexander responded by besieging them, and he quickly made sure they would surrender soon. As he was moving down the coast, he heard that another Phoenician city, Tyre, had also prepared for a siege. The citizens had constructed massive walls with towers and had filled the city with provisions. Moreover, the city was protected by the sea on 3 sides and only had land connections to the north. He first sent envoys to the city demanding their surrender, but they refused, so he began to besiege them. In 332 BC, he built a road connecting the mainland with the island, which was around 80 meters long. Then he started to construct a harbor there. This was a brilliant move because it allowed him to bombard the city from the sea. He also ordered ships to block off the other harbors of Tyre, so the citizens couldn't get any supplies from outside. Then he started to build another causeway to connect the mainland with the island. However, the citizens of Tyre noticed this, and they started to bombard the workers with arrows and stones. So Alexander had to abandon the project. The citizens were also using catapults and trebuchets to bombard the Macedonian camp. Because of all this, Alexander decided to lay a siege in the ground under the city walls. To do this, he gathered thousands of men and dozens of elephants. But the citizens of Tyre were expecting this and had dug out a canal nearby, which drained the swamps and made it impossible for the Macedonians to dig under the walls. However, Alexander didn't let this discourage him. Instead, he ordered the men to keep digging while the elephants were pulling a tower closer to the walls. But before they could bring it up to the walls, the Tyrians managed to set fire to the tower and several elephants. 2 elephants were killed, and Alexander himself barely managed to escape with his life. After this, he ordered to focus on the siege works again. The men kept digging day and night, but the progress was very slow. They only managed to dig a tunnel about 6 meters under the city wall every day. After 7 months, they were only about 40 meters under the walls, when suddenly one night, the tunnel collapsed. Fortunately, the collapse was not caused by the digging, but by the earth itself. The soil had simply given way. Although this was a setback, Alexander was close to breaking through. He ordered the men to dig even faster now, but at the same time, his army was being depleted by disease and hunger. His soldiers were suffering from dysentery, a painful intestinal disease. Some historians claim that this was a punishment from the gods because the Macedonians were polluting the sacred ground of Tyre. Others say that it was because they were eating too much fruit. Whatever the reason, the Macedonians were getting weaker every day, and so were the Tyrians. The people inside the city were starting to starve. They had to eat the leather off the books, and even their dogs were becoming emaciated. When Alexander heard this, he became more determined than ever to conquer the city. The siege works were speeded up even more. However, just when the Macedonians were about to break through, Alexander fell ill. Maybe it was the dysentery, or maybe his body simply gave up because of all the stress. Either way, his fever was so high that his servants had to put him in cold water to bring it down. Meanwhile, the siege continued. The men of Tyre were still fighting bravely, but their army was no match for the Macedonians. One evening, some deserters came to the camp of Alexander and told him that if he could get enough men together, he could easily capture the city. That was because the people of Tyre were exhausted and starving, and they hoped that Alexander would take pity on them and allow them to surrender. When he heard this, he knew that he finally had a chance to conquer the city without losing many men. So he ordered half of his army to sneak towards the city. Meanwhile, he ordered the other half to continue the siege works. That night, as the men were sneaking towards the city, the watchmen of Tyre saw them and raised the alarm. The people were ready to fight, but when they saw that the attacking force was only a small fraction of the Macedonian army, they weren't so sure anymore. Alexander then ordered to bring the rest of the army to the city walls, and the people of Tyre surrendered immediately. The citizens had hoped that Alexander would show mercy and spare their lives, but they were wrong. Despite all the hardships they had endured during the siege, Alexander was furious that they had resisted him for so long. He ordered to execute all the men and enslave the women and children. Only the very old and weak were allowed to live. The city was looted and burned, and the temple of Melkart was destroyed because it was a rival of his god Zeus. To make matters worse, he then turned on his ally, Ptolemy, who had betrayed the kingdom of Sidon to join him. He had trusted Ptolemy because he was an Egyptian who hated Persia, but now he saw that he had been tricked. He divided Ptolemy's kingdom between his other allies. So that was the end of Tyre. A city that had existed since the 27th century BC was now nothing but ashes. But why don't we know about it today? Well, that is because the Romans came along and took over the region. They spread their own version of events and simply ignored the great deeds of the Tyrians. You can see this happening over and over again in history. The victors write the history books, and the losers are often forgotten. And that is why today we don't know about the siege of Tyre, even though it was one of the greatest sieges in history. Now compare this to the siege of Leningrad during World War II. That siege is known by almost everyone today, although it was nothing compared to the siege of Tyre. Now it is time to make a quiz about this video. For each of these questions, only one answer is correct. How long did the siege of Tyre last? Was Tyre located on an island or on the mainland? What did the people of Tyre eat during the siege? If you have answered all the questions correctly, then congratulations, you have won. If not, then don't worry. Just keep watching and learning. As always, thanks for watching. Goodbye.